Thank you very much indeed, Hannah. Thank you all for being here. Wonderful to see Cadogan Hall filled with people for this event tonight. I am absolutely delighted to be your host for this evening and to have these two wonderful speakers with us. James Rhodes, a concert pianist with, frankly, a cult following. I think we can call it that.
That means small, doesn't it?
No, that means ardent. And so much more. His debut album, Razor Blades, Little Pills and Big Pianos, went to #1 on the iTunes chart, as have all 6 of his albums, and he'll be signing copies of his latest one after the event today. Now, as well as performing around the world as a pianist, James is also a best-selling writer and a TV and radio presenter. His memoir, Instrumental, a memoir of madness, medication and music, was the subject of an aggressive High Court injunction, which James had to take to the Supreme Court to win and publish. I'm delighted to say it's gone on to become an international bestseller. It's being adapted for the big screen. He's also the author of How to Play the Piano, which is part of a series called Little Ways to Live a Big Life. And his latest book, Fire on All Sides, wonderful read, I couldn't recommend it highly enough. Insanity, Insomnia, and the Incredible Inconvenience of Life reached #1 in Spain in its very first week of publication, and the accompanying album is also a #1 on iTunes. Then we have Armando Iannucci. I'm sure he'll be very familiar to all of you, one of Britain's most celebrated comedy writers and producers. He's the creator of things like Veep, The Day-to-Day, Alan Partridge, The Saturday Night Armistice, and of course, The Thick of It. Other producer credits include such classics as On the Hour and The Merry White House Experience. Now, we're very lucky to have both of our speakers here tonight, but particularly Armando, who's hot off the plane. He's been in the US and most recently Gothenburg, and he's back on the plane tomorrow to Rotterdam, promoting his satirical film, The Death of Stalin, which stars Simon Russell Beale, Michael Palin, and Steve Buscemi. It's a film so good that it's been banned in Russia, and I think that tells you all you need to know. Yeah. He, as well, is nothing if not a polymath. In 2016, he released his first book, The Audacity of Hype, which explored sleaze, bewilderment, and other 21st century tales, not the accents of the denizens of Sloane Square. His latest book, Hear Me Out, is a joyful account of his adventures in listening to classical music over the course of many years. Armando, I should say, is also the proud recipient of Grade 1 piano. So a warm welcome to you both.
Thank you.
I want to start with something that you both allude to in your book, which is this idea that a love of classical music is something that needs to be really fervently apologized for. Something almost to be ashamed of. I mean, James, you have been such a champion of classical music, but you do say that every time you mention how much you love it, you feel an apology coming on. The entirely undeserved reputation it has got makes saying you listen to it and enjoy it almost like a confession. And Armando, you too talk about this act of defiance against the keepers of the cool. And you say, I keep meeting people so battered by the collective imperative only to admit liking what the whole world is telling you to like, that they sneak out to classical lunchtime concerts with all the guilt of a Victorian clergyman desperately hunting a crack den.
Yes. That's the Wigmore Hall, the crack den, that I occasionally visit in disguise on a Monday lunchtime. Yes.
Well, why do we need to be in disguise about it? Why the apology?
For me, it's a sense of, there's a ritual about it, isn't there? Going to a classical concert that you break down, but you know, conventionally, there's so much that if you're new to classical music, I think people feel excluded by it, as if people are saying, well, unless you've got the score and brought it along, this isn't for the likes of you. You know, there's that sense of, and then you come in and nobody speaks. You know, everyone sits down and someone comes on and doesn't say anything, but sits down, and then if it's an orchestra, more people come on, and then the conductor comes on and doesn't say anything, and we start. And I think that puts a lot of people off. That's what I feel.
James, you've done more than anyone I can think of to break down those barriers and to get the message out that classical music can actually be something that can not only save lives, but enrich lives and enhance lives, any life, irrespective of who you are, what your background is, what your education is.
Yeah, I don't like the word classical. I mean, music is music. The minute you put the word classical in front of it, at some point, and I can't pinpoint exactly when, classical music was appropriated by a certain kind of person who wants to see it as a kind of elevated art form. And there are two ends. There's the very sacred, God forbid you don't wear a tie and you make a noise, and you need to know what a cadenza is and the sonata form in Beethoven's Vienna and when to applaud. There's that side, which is very, very stuffy. And then there's the really apologist side, which is these kind of assholes on Classic FM who will play, Waltzing Matilda on the guitar and say, this is classical music, or this is the famous bit off the Hovis ad, because actually you're a little bit too dumb to handle a 25-minute symphony, so we're sorry, this is classical. And there are all these rules, like Armando says. It's like, before you even get through the door, if you don't know anything about classical music, and you think, all right, where to start? Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. Everyone knows that. You go to Spotify, you go to iTunes. There are 400 fucking recordings of it with ridiculous album covers, like conductors like Gurning and
then you can even find it through the metadata.
Through all of that.
Wade
But
through
that's also the point. You look at it and you go, hang on, Presto, Adagio, 4 tracks? Is this 4-piece? And then you just go, oh, forget it. And you buy the 50 best chill-out classics ever.
Yeah.
Which is the worst thing in the world. So classical music apologizes for itself because for all of the talk about wanting to open it to new audiences, the people they're awful people in the classical music.
Oh,
they are.
Yeah.
The majority of them, they're just awful people, and they don't want new audiences at all. It's part of the reason I have been played, I think, once on Classic FM in 7 years, because whenever anyone says, actually, what you're doing is not helping the cause, it's just promoting your own record labels. And I'll give you a perfect example, the Classic Brit Awards. A few years ago, they had it, and Lang Lang, who's an amazing pianist, no one would deny that, he played a Chopin Polonaise. And because it's the big classic music event, it's on TV, even though it's at like ITV4 at 11 p.m. Everyone gets very excited because it's classical music on TV. And because it's on TV, it had to be under 3 minutes. And so he ripped and edited, he just missed out half of the Polonaise. He didn't find one of hundreds of pieces of music that fit under 3 minutes. He took the most famous piece Chopin wrote, didn't say, I'm going to edit this down, and played it because Classic FM said, well, you know what, it has to be under 3 minutes. And so if that's not an apology for classical music, I don't know what is. And it breaks my heart that they do.
Well,
And you're right about the children thing, because children are actually, they don't want to be talked down to, and they don't want simplified, hey, this represents an elephant, or this music is like a circus, isn't it? They're into gaming, which is about the most sophisticated narrative form there is, with many levels, and you're under control. They like things that are complex. And I remember once in the car, a bit of Ligeti came on the radio, and it was like, it's very, modern, it's dissonant, but it's amazingly entertaining. And to my son, who was about 5 or 6, I was trying to simplify, and I said, this sounds a bit like sort of bees buzzing, doesn't it? And he went, no, it sounds like a lot of penguins fighting for a fish, and one of them's caught it.
Wow.
And
obviously
he was absolutely right.
See a glittering future ahead as a program note writer.
But
you raised such an important point, because before children know that they're not supposed to like this, or before they're told that it's only for posh people or whatever it might be that gets drummed into them, their response to the music, like most human beings' response to the actual music, is immediate and valid and joyful. And
the big, much bigger point to all of this is this begins and ends with music education, which here with this audience, I'm sure is not really an issue. But nationwide, the successive governments, not just here, but all around the world, from Argentina to Germany, Germany, it's in crisis. It's hurtling off the edge of a cliff. And the government here were very, very clear in 2012. In black and white, they said, every child from every part of the country, no matter what their background, will have the opportunity to learn a musical instrument. Complete lie. It was just a complete lie.
Fake news.
Much worse than fake news. You know how they get around it? I've seen this with my own eyes. Occasionally, there'll be a classroom of 30 kids, and for 20 minutes once a week, they'll throw in 3 ukuleles. I'm not even joking. And they'll share the ukuleles, 1 to every 5 children. They'll strum it for a few minutes, and then they tick the box and say, that was our music lesson.
I want to talk more about the importance of this, but this really matters, doesn't it? I mean, James, you've been extraordinarily frank and candid and brave about talking about how music has actually saved your life. And for you, Armando, music brings dead people back to life, is how you rather wonderfully describe it.
Yes, it's that mystery, I think, of music. That's, for me, is part of its appeal. Without trying to get too mystical, I'm just fascinated by the idea that, it's noises. With a work, with a painting or with a play, there is some kind of representation. So there's some way of identifying what it means, or there's enough clues to try and work out what is trying to be conveyed. But with music, for me, it's just mysterious that you can put certain sounds and noises in a certain way, and it has the same general effect on people. It makes them feel happier, or makes them feel sad, or it excites them. And I just find that, really mysterious, and I love that mystery about it, in that you can't actually boil it down to words. And the other thing is, listening to, and you're right, classical music is like too narrow a term, because we're talking about music from the last 500, 600 years.
Longer.
To be able to
Hildegard of Bingen.
Yes, to be listening to that piece of music and thinking that is a sound that someone 300, 400 years ago also heard. That's what I find kind of exciting about it.
And actually, you cite a developmental psychologist in your book, David Hargreaves, who argues that there's something innate in music. It's very easy. I mean, Leonard Bernstein talked about universal grammar. It's an easy thing to throw around, this idea of music as the universal language, and I find myself endlessly saying that, people sort of roll their eyes at me. But actually, what you both argue so powerfully for is that there is this sort of innate power that music has over human beings, as you quote it, Armando, a deep structure that triggers activity in the brains of anyone who hears it, whether they're from Cheshire or Chad. You're from North London and Glasgow, respectively. How did you first encounter classical music, and was it an instant love affair?
Yeah, like Armando said, it goes beneath words. It's pre-verbal, and it's bigger than music. That's the point about children and music, whether it's classical or whoever, it doesn't make any difference. You see how they innately respond to music. And study after study has shown that it has a dramatic effect on well-being, on discipline, on focus, on literacy, on numeracy, on so much more than just learning an instrument. In my case, I found an old cassette, because I'm really old, with a piece of Bach on it. And it changed everything for me, because it goes underneath words, and like Armando was saying, it tells a story that oftentimes we, still as adults, we don't have words for, but there's a feeling that's anchored underneath it, and that's why it's so important. It's why it baffles me that Ofsted don't care about music. It baffles me that every child in this country doesn't have access to music, because the price we're paying is that an entire generation, not only will they not know who Bach is, they won't know what a violin looks like, let alone sounds like. And we talk about building a £400 million concert hall, another one in London, which is 5 years of the music budget nationwide. I mean, it's insane.
It's especially criminal in a way, because we have so much evidence that proves, as you say, the benefits of classical music education on any aspect of a child's development. And it's not about creating more musicians.
And it's kind of intangible what it does. It has such a powerful effect, but you can't quantify what that effect is. And therefore, it doesn't fall within how education is measured now.
Sometimes you
can
can
quantifiable qualifications towards employment.
Yeah,
really.
I'm not suggesting for a moment that we hold Venezuela up.
The point is, but we all know this. Like, is there any single person in this audience who would put their hand up, be brave enough to put their hand up and say, actually, I don't think music education is important at all?
Anyone?
Like, I would love to hear your reason for that. Because I've worked in schools. I've been in school. If you take a kid who is 8 years old, who's not particularly academic, who's not very athletic, who's not very popular, And you give him an instrument, or her an instrument, a flute, a violin, a trombone, a piano, whatever.
Even a ukulele.
Even a ukulele, absolutely. It's like a gateway drug to the guitar. And then you put them in an orchestra. You form a school orchestra and you give them a solo. And almost overnight, that kid grows 3 feet taller, gets more confident. The kids who never used to want to talk to him are helping him tune up and rehearse. There's teamwork. You can't imagine the change it has. And that's just in the school. And then that you move into their home and you see what the siblings are like around it and what the community as a whole is like. And that he's practicing with his dad and he's doing work with his mum and his other friends. And literally it's a life-changing experience, which makes it all the more bizarre that we are still having this debate in 2018.
And also the opportunities to learn are much greater now in that you can go on YouTube, you can watch piano lessons on YouTube. You know,
you discovered music through your local library, which
It was
is
my local
another
library, yes.
vexing conversation about the end of libraries and how important
yes,
they are.
I know, that was...
But it was the LP, it wasn't even a cassette tape, it was LP.
The LP collection, yes. I mean, I grew up in a kind of small tenement flat, 2 brothers and a younger sister, and I shared a room with my brother, and he was into, you know, Deep Purple and Pink Floyd and all the colours, King Crimson and you know, which is fine, but it never quite jolted me. You know, it's sort of, and I wondered, why am I not reacting to this the way everyone's meant to react? It was at a school, it was just a music appreciation class at school that happened so seldom, and I looked forward to them every time I knew one was looming. And I remember the first one I went to, and the teacher just put a needle down on a vinyl recording of just Holst's The Planets. I mean, it was very basic, well-known, but I was like thinking, that's my noise, that's it. I haven't heard this before, and I want to hear more of it. It was actually the orchestra, the sound of an orchestra playing, and the complexity of it, but the energy behind it. And then this library opened up just down the road, Hillhead Library, with a massive gramophone collection.
Does it still exist?
Does the gramophone, the library does. I must pop in and see if they still have a record collection. And that was just my education because, you know, it was free. I could try stuff out. I could experiment. I could take something home, and if I didn't like it, I hadn't spent whatever it was, £6 on it.
And there was music in schools, and there were trips to concerts. And I worked in a school a little while ago where they literally had no music at all. There was no... And when I said to the headmistress, if I pay for 5 years out of my own pocket to get an orchestra and get it up and running, get everything you need, and would you do it? And we came up with the figures, and she just laughed and said, no, of course not. We'd spend that money on maths and English because that's all we live or die by that, as far as Ofsted is concerned. Because it's not just the instruments. I worked in a school where kids couldn't take instruments I'd given them home because mum would sell it to buy crack. And then you have to store it in schools, so you need storage, you need lockers, and then you need insurance. A whole host of problems that all the talking in the world isn't going to fix, but government could relatively easily and relatively quickly
and cheaply
change. Yeah, it's not expensive. They could do it, and they don't.
Because in Russia, the commitment to art, to ballet, to music, to
huge.
Literature, poetry is huge.
It's in their blood.
And I wrote a libretto for an opera that was commissioned originally by Komisch Opera in Berlin, and I remember going to see their opening night, and it was another Ligeti, it was Ligeti opera, so quite an avant-garde, modernist piece. The mayor of Berlin was there for the opening night. Of course he was. It's the mayor of Berlin. But of course, we wouldn't get a politician wanting to be seen at an opera.
Of course, it's far too pop.
Well, again,
it
goes back to that shame thing, that
it's
sense
that,
of equality.
it's fine, I'll go to a football match. I might talk about a movie I went to see, but I'll sneak into the theatre, but I definitely can't be photographed at an opera or a classical concert.
Except, of course, for Justin Trudeau, who's been very open in his love of, and Emmanuel Macron. Maybe the tide is turning.
But who do we have? Michael Gove. I mean, but really, he'll sneak off to the opera and pretend to all of his friends he likes it, but when he had the opportunity to do something about it, wouldn't do it. It's the most hypocritical thing. I mean, we could talk about this for hours. It makes me stabby with rage.
There's a wonderful line in your book, James, that you say music is the one trustworthy thing that there is, and we're taking it away from an entire generation of children.
Yeah.
Armando, you have been very open in the book about the fact that for years you've basically been a listener.
Yes.
You can't just sit at the piano and do that.
No, you won't see that happen.
That won't happening. Then when you were 40, your wife bought you a piano for your birthday,
Yes.
and there's a hilarious vignette of you sitting in someone's kitchen about a year later, sitting on a very low blue plastic chair, clutching your sheet music amongst a load of 7-year-olds, because you were, as I alluded to in the introduction, about to take your grade 1 piano.
Yes.
Why at 40 did you think it was time?
Well, I mean, I was a president. I didn't. No, I work to deadlines. I always have done. That's how I write pieces to a deadline. You're doing a TV show. There's a sort of a weekly kind of. That's just how I function. I thought the only way I'm going to make myself learn is by giving myself something to work towards. So I applied for grade 1. I signed up with a piano teacher. You do realize that when you're a bit more grown up, you're a bit more in control. So it does take a bit of the pressure off, because every time I went to see my piano teacher and she'd say, "Did you practice this week?" I'd go, "No."
Yeah.
And
What are you going to do about it?
I'm paying for it. What are you going to do? You're going to keep me in after school. So I did this, and I made myself go for grade 1, and I didn't realize that a lot of these exams are held in people's houses, and there I was sitting in a tiny little, like a praying mantis next to all the, and a magnificent piece of Chopin was being played next door, and out walks a 5-year-old, which is quite chuffed. And that's what I did. And what I hadn't realized was that what I'd been practicing on was a digital keyboard with the soft keys, and then I'd go in and it's something like that. And it's like I'd picked up a trombone. It was like a completely different instrument, because just the touch was much heavier, and I hadn't practiced that. There was a little tiny plastic keyboard in the kitchen, like one of these little kind of electronic things that primary school teachers play the wheels on the bus on, that you were meant to kind of warm up on. But, so I hadn't really, and I just started laughing during it, because I just thought, this is ridiculous, because, I've won a BAFTA. I've done live television. Yeah. It was fine.
I've been banned in Russia.
But I've been banned in, and I just, and the only thought that kept me going was, I think when I was about 30, I joined an improver's swimming course, because I could never really, I missed that lesson at school where they taught you how to dive in and do the crawl and stuff. So I thought I'll go to that. And it was good, but it was full of middle-aged men mostly, who were used to being able to order people around, now kind of mostly naked in a pool, being told what to do by an 18-year-old with a whistle. And the ones that were bad at it couldn't cope with being bad. And there was one guy, during the crawl, there was one guy who just shouted, "Aerodynamically, this just isn't possible." And the 18-year-old said, "Well, people have been doing it for thousands." And he just refused, and he got up, and he left, and he never came back. So as I was doing this, I was thinking, I mustn't be like that.
You were going, aerodynamically, this isn't possible.
We must get through this, and I passed by 1.
Yeah.
I think
A round of applause.
But I've kind of forgotten it now, because I've fallen out of habit, so which is why I'm going to take up the
Well, I was going to say,
learn the piano challenge. Yeah.
well, James, you've dedicated a whole book to the idea that actually anyone can play. Armando's a good example of this.
Yeah.
Beautiful book, How to Play the Piano.
Thank you.
Does what it says on the tin.
Stroke of marketing genius.
Stroke of marketing.
My book about guitar poetry. No, the idea is...
It's got Bach at its heart, and why Bach?
Why Bach?
For the idea that anyone can play.
Well, there are two approaches to learning an instrument. There's the thing that sends shivers down our spine of being a kid and having to do scales. And I can't tell you how many people come up to me after concerts and say, that was awful. No, they push their kids up to me and they say, you've got to tell Charlie he's got to practice his scales. And I go, no, you practice your fucking scales. Why? I mean, it's not necessary. So you can go down that route, scales and arpeggios, playing pieces that you really don't like because your teacher's forcing, and exams and the pressure of that. Or what if you just want to play one piece of music, a really beautiful, simple piece of music, in this case, a prelude by Bach, written 300 years ago, that still today you play and people just go, that's amazing. And it's not particularly hard. It's a question of logic and physics. And so I wrote a book, I figured 6 weeks, 40 minutes a day, you have Sundays off. It teaches you how to read music, teaches you which fingers to use, how to use the pedal. You do 2 bars a day. 6 weeks later, you're playing a piece of Bach, and it's absolutely true. I get sent videos from people on Twitter who maybe they used to play when they were a kid, and they didn't play for 30 years, and they started again because they regretted it. Or they've never played, and they buy a 30-quid keyboard off Amazon, and now they're playing a piece of Bach. Why Bach? Because when you get home, after a hard day at the office, you can watch Love Island eating chicken from a bucket. I mean, what the fuck? Or you can find 40 minutes with a little keyboard, maybe with your kid or your girlfriend or your boyfriend, and do something that is extraordinary, I think. Do you want to hear it?
I want to hear it.
How funny would it be if I screw this up? How could you imagine it? But it's 2 minutes long. So listen to this piece and bear in mind it's eminently doable for every single person in this hall tonight. The really important point about that is that we're so used to doing everything with an app. And if a web page doesn't load in half a second, we move on to something else. The idea of just having a book and spending 40 minutes, and you need 2 hands and a keyboard, and anyone could do that in 6 weeks.
But without changing a note, what I noticed there was you showed how romantic and passionate Bach is, because people have this image of Bach as being rigid and cool and mathematical.
But that's the other point. That's
you mentioned logic and physics.
But this is a really cool
soul, isn't it?
But
that's
that
passion.
piece, there are so many different ways to play this piece. And again, you can play it super cold, like or you can go the other extreme and play it super romantic. Like there's a girl you like and you want to really, and you can do it without pedal. You can use a lot of pedal. There's so many different ways of doing it, and there's no wrong way. No one can say to you, that's the wrong way to do it. And that's another reason I chose Bach, because Bach never gave tempo indications or dynamic indications. Sometimes he didn't even say what bloody instrument it should be played on. So really, you can play it how you want. What a lovely thing.
Yeah, to have that freedom, because it's ironic that he, perhaps above all other composers, is policed by the classical music.
And so romantic.
Yeah.
Oh my God, this guy, right? He was like a Baroque Mick Jagger. He had 20 children. Like really, like shagged his way around. But 11 of them died in infancy or childbirth. When he was 4, like half of his siblings had died. At 9, his mum died. At 10, his father dies. He's shipped off to live with an elder brother. He's beaten so badly at school. He's absent for more than half of his school days because of the abuse going on there. As a teenager, he walks hundreds of kilometers to go to school to study music as a teenager. And he marries the love of his life. She dies. Half their kids die. And you say, oh no, Bach isn't romantic. He's very kind of just rhythmical and mathematical. I'm sorry, it had to come out somewhere.
Yeah,
He spent some time in prison as well, didn't he?
Yeah, because he wouldn't compose what the court wanted him to. And he was dueling. He was arrested for shagging groupies in the organ loft. I mean, the guy was really, he was a player.
If there'd been anti-social behaviour orders in Curtin in 80, he would have definitely got one. But it's so interesting
A Bach's bow. No. Sorry.
He's often held up as you say. I mean, you mentioned logic, you mentioned physics as this supremely mathematical composer because the complexity of Bach's fugues, the complexity of lots of his music is there.
There is a lot of maths in it. He was obsessed with numbers. He added up his name, the initials, the letters in his name corresponding to the code in the alphabet. A is 1, B is 2. And if you add them all up, you get 41. 4 and 1, you reverse it, you get 40. And I mean, I told you, we're mental music. And he would use these little ciphers. There would be, 41 bars in a piece, or after 6 bars. He wrote 6 of everything. 6 English suites, 6 partitas, 6 French suites, 6 Brandenburg concertos, 6 cello suites. He was obsessed with numbers. And yet, at the same time, the depth of feeling, the heroism, the grief, the despair, the happiness, everything, it all goes into it.
He's undoubtedly, well, in my view, the greatest, and most people would accept that he is one of the greats. But in general, is there a problem with the idea of a canon that is, as I say, sort of policed by people who go, these are the great composers and anyone else around them is secondary? Because, Armando, this is a point that you make. Your range of musical heroes in the book is astounding. Ligeti, as you say, discovered as a teenager, to Martineau, to the forgotten British symphonist William Alwyn. Any other William Alwyn enthusiasts in the room?
He's a great film composer as well, by the way.
You're a celebrity enthusiast right here. But
but that really arises from that thing of not having a structured plan by which I was taught, in that I had to arrive at it myself. I had to get in. I loved Mahler, and part of the reason I loved Mahler was I was allowed to take out 3 discs with my ticket, but Mahler wrote such long symphonies. They were double albums. So I was like, I'd cracked the system. I was taking out a 4th. I thought, we'll try that. And I fell in love with it because it was just this amazingly passionate, dramatic, over-the-top, sentimental, but yet also really intellectual as well, music. And one thing would then suggest another. So, Mahler people would talk about Bruckner. So I listened to Bruckner. I didn't quite get into him, but I listened to Wagner and see the correlation between the two. Wagner's opera, Benjamin Britten opera, everything, connects with something else. And so it's not like you start at the beginning and work your way through, but you just dive in. And that's the great joy for me, is that it is unquantifiable because there is more of it than you can ever possibly hear. And that means you don't actually have to like everything you hear.
Well,
it's not like saying, I love books, I love all books. I love all the books I've read are great. Yeah. You'll come across stuff that doesn't click with you, and that's fine. You're not less of a classical music enthusiast for not liking something.
Well, I want to bring us to Mozart, because where you do agree that Bach is the greatest, you rather diverge on the subject of Mozart. And Intelligence Squares, of course, is famous for its wonderful debates. I'm not sure we can get a debate going here, but Armando, I just want to quote you, if I may.
Oh, God.
I've never been able to sit through a production of The Magic Flute without thinking it's the silliest, messiest story I've ever seen. I've gone off in a huff and put some Wagner on instead. James, meanwhile, you describe listening obsessively to a certain pair of Mozart operas. You say these two are by Mozart, which helps. The biggest deterrent to opera for me is Wagner. Discuss. No, quite seriously though, Mozart. Armando, you make a very serious point with, in a playful way, of course, by pointing out that actually you really struggle to get to a point where you did appreciate Mozart.
I like Mozart. I'm warming to him. I still think I need a bit more encouragement, a bit of help. But I'm especially later Mozart, and it's difficult to say later when he died at whatever, 34, 35. But the music he was writing, near the end of his life. What I think for me was, as I was starting out and listening, and it may just be that kind of reaction to what you're told, everyone was telling me, oh, Mozart, And I remember listening to, on Radio 3, the Bernard Levin doing a talk, an interval talk, where he actually praised to the god Mozart, quite seriously. And I think maybe I just reacted against it because I didn't get it. It seemed to me like a kind of, the Mozart I heard seemed like, variations on Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. It felt too sugary and too nice, That's how I felt. Now, subsequently, I've come across one of the most amazing opera productions I ever went to was The Magic Flute, done in conjunction with the Iannucci and Theatre de Complicité. I've also walked out of Wagner opera for just being terrible to watch. It was all set in a barrack home, and the whole thing rests on you believing that the gods are the gods. But if you put them in a barrack home, you've kind of negated the next
Valhalla
16
by
hours.
way of barrack homes doesn't quite work.
So, and that's the other thing I just want to say. It's evolving. Taste is evolving. You mustn't stick with what you liked when you were 15, 16, and that's it. And that's actually why for me, classical music is more enriching than, I don't get that buzz out of pop music or rock music. In that, for me, that music seems connected with a particular point in time in your life or a particular memory but with classical music, it feels to me timeless. It feels like you're still learning and finding new pieces, even though those pieces might be 400 years old.
And even if it's the same piece, actually, you're always finding new interpretations. James,
yes.
You write so convincingly and compellingly about a particular interpretation of these Mozart operas. Yeah. And I wanted to talk to you a bit about the importance of the interpreter. Tell us about your young Greek god, Theodore Karensis, and why it makes such a difference to hear him conduct Mozart operas.
Yeah, there is a guy at the moment on the scene, for my money, the greatest living conductor. And I don't say that lightly. I mean, he's only released a small number of albums, but amongst those are 3 of the Mozart operas. And they are the only recordings I've ever heard of any composer by any performer where you just know when you're listening to it, this is what Mozart heard in his head while he was writing it down. I don't know where to start with Mozart. I mean, I'm not religious at all, but he is proof of God. You can say, look, study Shakespeare and he'll show us who we are. But if you study Mozart, he'll show us who we could be, potentially, if some unbelievable miracle happened. I'm serious. You can buy his complete works on CD on Amazon now. 180 CDs. Get 180 CDs. He died at 35. He started composing at 5. So in 30 years, he produced the equivalent of 6 albums a year. Think about that for a minute. From the age of 5. Can you think of a single contemporary artist who could maintain even 2 albums a year for 30 years that you'd want to listen to? And then even more, you think about the fact that...
And that would get better.
Actually, it does get better, but there are also moments that his second piano concerto, he was 11, has a slow movement that it just shreds your heart. I mean, I can't tell you. So yeah, on the one hand, maybe it gets better. On the other hand, it's already there. Like, a lot of you will know the story that when he was a very young teenager, 13, 14, his dad took him to a church and he heard a choir singing. And they were singing Miserere by a composer called Allegri. And in that day, sacred music in church, it was illegal to take the score out of the church. It was illegal even to look at the score. And Mozart, he'd heard this and he said to his dad, fuck that, what is this music? Where can I get it? And his dad said, I'm sorry, you can't. So the kid goes home, 14, locks himself up in his attic, writes down the entire thing from memory. The organ part, the vocal part, everything. And says to his dad, I really wanted to know that score, so I wrote it down so I can study it. 41 symphonies, 27 piano concertos, dozens of operas, 26 string quartets. I mean, there are no words to describe it. And then when you hear someone like Theodore Karensis bring it to life. Those are literally Don Giovanni, Marriage of Figaro, and Così fan tutte. Those recordings of carences that he's made are the only recordings I listen to now on a regular basis. I don't need 10 desert
Of
island
any
discs.
genre or just
of any genre, full stop. Everything you need to know about the world is in there.
Yeah.
And actually, I don't necessarily agree about the distinction between classical being richer than other forms. I was obsessed with Wham when I was a kid, I'm sorry. And I was obsessed with Queen, and to me it's the same thing. It releases the same kind of chemicals, and yes, classical music, perhaps it's longer, it's more complex. A lot of the time it doesn't have words, so you can provide your own story, and I think all of that makes it a slightly different experience. But, you know, it's the same 12 tones.
And he's just released, the conductor has just released Tchaikovsky's Sixth Symphony.
The Pathetique
and on your recommendation, I listened to that on the recommendation of him.
If there's one thing you take home from today, like, please, listen on Spotify or iTunes or whatever, Theodor Karensis, his name is, Current, and then Z-I-S. He's 6'5", chain smoking. He's like fucking Mozart meets Leonard Bernstein meets Kurt Cobain, and he's revolutionized music.
And no doubt, for a lot of purists, he is the end of days. And I wanted to talk a bit about gatekeepers, and particularly around opera, actually. When you mentioned Mozart operas, Wagner, certainly I was put off Wagner opera for so long because I felt that I wouldn't take the score in with me. I couldn't, every leitmotif and the bars in which they occurs, every production that has ever been a Bayreuth, I didn't have those reference points.
Again, I don't know whether that was my reaction to what, because I
think that's a very pervasive reality.
I grew up with a Neapolitan father who played Puccini and Verdi all weekend very, very loudly. And again, I don't know whether that's me going, okay, I can't have that then because that's someone else's. What can I have? You know, what's the opposite? What's the opposite of Puccini? No, Puccini's glorious, actually.
Absolutely.
But it's that thing of how your tastes are shaped by what you're made to feel at the time, you know.
And there's a fabulously satirical chapter in your book about a night at the opera, which also includes a portrait of the sort of classical, tyrannical opera maestro. How much do you think classical music is compromised by, or even ruined perhaps in the eyes of potential audiences, by those stereotypes, by those tropes? I mean, they're grounded in truth, unfortunately.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's what we were saying at the start, isn't it? I mean, you want... I think the reason that recording says so much is that there's someone who is starting afresh with the score and going, okay, as you say, what's it like to recreate that impression of having heard this music for the very first time?
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's what everyone has to do. Every player has to do it, every orchestra, every interpreter has to do it. But what you get, I think, in some of these institutions is, no, you've got to know exactly what you're going to get in advance. And you've got to have
champagne and
a
smoked salmon at the
knowledge of
interval.
it. Yeah, you know.
But a lot of it's down to the performers as well. I mean, I've played at Sonar Festival, Latitude Festival, and played to audiences that have been so much quieter and more respectful than the Barbican or the festival.
Yeah.
It doesn't make it. The majority of classical concerts today, in my experience, honestly, I would rather sit at home and listen to Spotify than pay 45 quid, go to the Barbican at 8:30 in the evening, starving hungry, in the rain, and listen to 2.5 hours of music, and where there are all of these rules that seem to apply. And the performers, you go to a piano recital, the guy walks on, ridiculous outfit, and he scowls at you. And he sits down and he plays, and then he scowls, and then he goes home. And you think, well, okay, I mean, of course, I'll always go to that because it's Kissin or Sokolov or Zimmer. I love these guys, they're my heroes. But what I would give to hear one of them just spend 3 minutes saying, I'm going to play you this piece by Beethoven. And when he composed it, he just got a new piano. And it's like a kid getting a new iPhone. The enthusiasm you can hear from the opening chords. It had more sounds, it had a different pedal, it had more notes. And just to hear why he's playing it, that to me, it makes all the difference.
That's why you're such a gem, James Rhodes. And we're going to get you to tell us about your next piece, which is based on opera originally, comes from Orfeo e Eurydice.
Look, this is the ultimate love song for me. So this opera, Orfeo and Eurydice, most of you will know the story where Orfeo, the love of his life, she dies, and the Greek, they take her down to hell, Eurydice. And he goes, come on, God, please, she's so young, I love her so much, let me go down and rescue her. And they say, okay, but if you find her, you can bring her back to real life, but you can't turn and look at her while you're leading her back. I mean, because they were dicks, the gods. They just like playing these little games. And so they say, if you turn and look at her, she'll die instantly. So he goes down to the underworld and he finds her. And he's leading her back, and of course she's getting more and more upset. She's thinking, why isn't he looking at me? Have I got fat? It's like kind of, if they were millennials, she'd be saying, come on, let's take a selfie with our selfie stick for Instagram. And anyway, he turns and looks at her, and she's killed instantly. To be fair, anyone using a selfie stick should be killed instantly, I think. But it ends up okay in the end. They bring her back to life because they realize love is important. And anyway, this piece of music is what accompanies him as he goes down to find her at the start of his journey. He doesn't know if he'll find her. He doesn't know if he'll survive. He doesn't know if he'll live or die. And so ostensibly, it's quite a dark piece. And yet this is the magic trick with classical music that I don't get from other forms. Underneath the sadness, there is so much love and joy and surrender and hope and positivity that it's like it's sad, but it's flavored with so much more depth than that. So this is an arrangement by an Italian composer called Giovanni Scambatti, if people care about things like that.
book is incredibly open about the hell of being on tour and of the particular nerves and horrors for you of performance day. And I imagine that a piece like that, which so exemplifies beauty, so exemplifies stillness, is a great ally when it comes to your sort of mental and spiritual health. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about how music gets you through life, because you credit it with your life, literally.
Yeah, and maybe that sounds a bit melodramatic, but I don't think I think I'm far from unique in that. Like, life without music would be inconceivable to all of us. And also, when you say the hell of touring, I should be abundantly clear, you know, it's really not an important job that I have. It's really a lot of fun, and it's what I've wanted to do since I'm one of the lucky ones. I'm like one of those kids who is obsessed with football and finds himself playing alongside Messi and Ronaldo and wakes up and goes, how did this happen? And
that does bring with it its certain pressures and responsibilities too, though.
It does, yeah. But I think the truth is I think it depends how you're wired. You won't believe me, but it's the absolute truth. I feel the same anxiety about playing in front of 2,500 people at a sold-out concert from memory, 100,000 notes, as I did when I used to work in Burger King when I was a teenager. I promise you, would I burn the burgers? Would I get fired? Will I get too overwhelmed? Am I going to be on time? Am I going to be late? Am I going to get paid on time? Are the customers going to be the same kind of just, it's the same, am I going to remember it? Is the piano going to be okay? Is the audience going to be? That's just the way I am. And touring is tricky because it's lonely and lots of jet lag, and audiences don't care. They don't care if you've been on a plane for 14 hours and it's 4 o'clock in the morning, body clockwise. They paid their ticket and they want to have a good time. And there's also the idea that I'm playing pieces that I have worshipped. I've worshipped in a way that you can't imagine, like just the greatest part of my life for so long. And now I'm the guy on stage playing it, saying, listen to this, listen to what Beethoven wrote, out of his mind with grief. Of course there's a certain, with a healthy dose of perspective, there's a certain amount of pressure that comes from that. I don't want to let them down. And you always let them down, because the bar is up here. The bar are pianists like Argerich and Sokolov. And if I do a concert with 100,000 notes, and 3 of those notes I've put 3 grams more weight on one finger, the concert's ruined. Genuinely, that's the perfect concert is. And so you never get that. So you're always falling slightly short, and you always feel like a bit of a fraud, and it's never quite good enough.
Argerich and Sokolov never feel they get there, though.
No, Sokolov doesn't think that either. I think like any job, it's a difficult.
There's also something about touring that's the lack of you're not in control.
And there's no routine.
You're at the mercy of the theatre, the cinema.
Well, I was going to ask you, Armando, you're someone who's also on tour a lot. Do you find that you also turn to music as it's been important?
Not
in that way, but
no. What I suffer from badly is jet lag. I just, which is why I stopped doing Veep in the end. That and United Airlines' lack of ability to say sorry. Many times. But I did carry, when I was out in Baltimore a lot, I did carry this Brennan, this hard drive with all my CD collection on it. And I spent about 4 months loading in all my CD. And I brought it with me. And it was a godsend, because you're out of sync, you're in a different place, you don't know anyone, and you're doing this thing,
it keeps you company.
Show, and there it is.
It's a lovely thing. It's like talk radio. I will always be so grateful for talk radio. When you're lonely and it's 4 in the morning and you want to blow your brains out, and you turn on the radio and you have someone chatting to you. I did that so many times, either on tour when I was a teenager, and it's the same with music. Every night before bed when I was a kid, I would put on a CD or a cassette or whatever of Horowitz or Guildhall or Kissin, and I would close my eyes and I would pretend it was me playing. And if it was a live album, even better, because you'd get the applause, and I'd be lying there going, yes, didn't I do great? And I was a weird kid, but it was amazing. It was amazing, and it has the same effect now.
And in the morning, I always put on a piece of Bach, just on Spotify. Spotify is great, actually.
Incredible.
You could tune into Radio 3 Breakfast, where we play Bach before 7 every morning.
Yes. Yes, if the jet lag has kicked in and I'm up at 4 a.m. I get the end of the.
But also, you never play the same piece twice. You can study a Beethoven sonata for 25 years, and still discover new things and different ways to play it and different things that you want to do. And there's a lot of, I mean, how do you know what you're doing is right? It's why so many classical musicians re-record the same piece after 10 years or 20 years, because you listen to it and you think, oh, what was I thinking? It was completely wrong. It has to be this way now.
And also we forget how different concerts were. When Beethoven was doing a concert, I mean, this was the only time they could hear the music. There was no recordings. So he'd play a piece, and if they liked the movement, they'd applaud, and they'd say, do it again. So he'd do it again. And the concert would go on for like 5 hours. And people would come and go.
Program these mental concerts that had like 4 symphonies in them and a new piano concerto.
Oh, my favorite Beethoven concert story. This is a bit geeky, but it's really fun.
No pressure.
His first piano concerto. His first piano concerto was in C major, very beautiful, lovely, happy piece. And at the premiere, he was doing the solo part and conducting, and the copyist was writing it out, and it was so to the wire. They didn't have time to rehearse or anything. They get there, they're handing out for the orchestra the sheet music, and the ink's still wet. And they're about to start, and they realize that the piano is at half a tone out of tune with the rest of the orchestra. And so what he does, Beethoven, as he goes along, instead of playing his own first piano concerto in C major, he plays it in C sharp major, on the fly. I mean, any musicians here would just go, holy shit. I mean, insane. I love that. It's Beethoven. And for me, he's the best. He's greater than Bach, he's greater than all of them.
That leads us rather beautifully to our final piece before we open it out to the audience. And you're going to tell us about a particular sonata by Beethoven.
Yeah, it's not really I'm not going to play it because it's long. It's like 22 minutes long. But I wanted to give you an idea. I have recorded it, actually. I'm signing CDs afterwards, my CDs. So you can... Is it on this one? I can't remember. Yes, it is on this one. So you got... It's his 31st piano sonata. Like, what have you done today, right? He wrote 32 sonatas. Holy shit. But I'm going to give you a couple of examples from this piece. When you think of, it's hard to put into words. The opening, it's so condensed that the first 3 bars, here we are. That's the first 3 bars, and within those 3 bars is almost all the thematic material from the first movement, parts of the second movement, and almost all the thematic material of the last movement, condensed. And it's the last movement that I want to talk about. There are moments with this piece where time just stands still. Like, there's no movement at all. And there's, like, at the opening, I'm going to play you the opening as he wrote it. And you'll hear, after about 40 seconds, there's an A, a single note. And he repeats it, like, 28 times. At this point in his life, he's completely deaf. He's sick. This is the only piece he writes in 1820. He knows he's sick with the illness that's going to end up killing him. And he's desperately alone. And he goes inside. And this is like, it's like reading his diary. This is what he writes. This is the last movement, just the opening of it. That's the introduction, and then he writes what he calls his Song of Lamentation. which is like the proper theme, and just listen to the grief in this. And it carries on in that vein, but then the magic happens. You think it can't get any sadder, and it has to end, and then he writes a fugue, which I'll show you. This is important, how he ends this movement. So we think it's going to get happier now, and actually it does. If the fugue progresses, this is kind of a standard, and you think this is going to be the end of the whole sonata. And then he pulls this unbelievable kind of plot twist. The whole thing gets really kind of loud and rambunctious, and you think it's the end, but it isn't. So listen to what he does. Goes back to the original sad theme, but ornamented, and he writes at the top, exhausted, like he's got nothing left in him. And you hear in the music, you hear him gasping for breath, like he can barely breathe. Listen to this. The whole thing just, it's like, it's the most intimate he gets. So then here's my favorite bit, and then I'm going to finish and we'll talk about something else. But do you remember how we ended last time? Listen to what he does now. I'm going to play it exactly as written. I promise you, I'm not changing anything. Now, we recognize that fugue. Firstly, those chords. It's like Jesus dying on the cross in his mind. And then he writes, little by little, gaining new life, coming back to life. We think we know it. And all he's done is he's turned upside down the original fugue. And then he spends the rest of the movement turning it back the right way round until it ends in this blaze of glory. It's incredible. Even the ending, from being so desperately sad It's like, the whole thing is all about his redemption. And just finally, just to finish, because this is a little touch that makes me so happy, even if no one else here really gets it. The end of the first movement, right? This is way before that fugue that we talked about. The very end of the movement, listen to this. Okay, you don't think you notice anything about that, but I'm going to put 3 grams more weight on my thumb when I play it, and listen to what happens. You hear it? It's the fugue. So right from the start, we have... So you can study a piece like this for 20 years, and in every bar there is so much to learn and to discover, and which is why you need a teacher, and not one who's going to force you to do scales, but one who's going to really enjoy kind of digging into stuff like that.
Which is why we all need James Rhodes. Ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. Yes.
When you watch it,
Then you hear it.
you feel it.
We've got about 15 minutes for your questions for Armando and James. There are 2 stand mics in the gallery, so if you are in the gallery and you would like to ask a question, please line up in decorous fashion at the stand mics, and then we've got ushers down here as well. So I'll take questions in batches of 2 or 3. So any questions for James or Armando or both? Over there. We'll take one, and then down here, gentleman in the front in the blue, if we can get the microphone to him. Thank you very much indeed. And up in the gallery, anyone at the stand mic? Yes, okay. Let's start in the gallery.
Well, they have to get up and do the walk of shame.
Oh, you've got to do the walk of shame. All right, we'll start down here first, and then get yourselves over to the mic. Right, gentlemen, thank you very much.
I thought that was fantastic.
Oh, hello, where are you?
I've always loved music. Miserere is one of my favourite pieces. Glenn Gould's Goldberg variations, you know, all that stuff just makes me feel wonderful. You know, when I was 14, I could recite every single Chuck Berry lyric. And, you know, Goldberg variation would have just gone straight over my head. And, you know, by the time I was 19, I was a roadie for The Clash, you know. And, you know, when I hear, you know, Anarchy in the UK, it's still like, it's like a shot of adrenaline. It's amazing. But, and it is spiritual. I mean, it's all spiritual. But, you know, maybe trying to force feed kids classical musical, which that doesn't necessarily appeal to them, is the wrong way. And maybe, you know, the Stratocaster is the gateway drug to the Stradivarius.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's not about force feeding. I mean, any feeding would be great, to be honest with you.
I don't think there is force feeding of...
No, but it is. But it's about music. It's not about saying, listen to Bruckner for 70 minutes, or I'm going to smash... It's about all of it. It's how Bach leads directly to Mozart and Haydn, that leads to Beethoven, that ends up with Justin Bieber. It doesn't... It's how you get there. That is equally about... Listening to Lana Del Rey is equally valid as listening to Beethoven. I would never dare tell an 8-year-old kid that somehow Justin Bieber is less worthy of her time or attention than Bach. It's about music, full stop. What makes up, how do you read music? How do you play the piece she wants to play on the piano? It's why if you have a kid and you're taking them to music lessons and they really don't want to play Clementi or Mozart, let them play the theme from The Simpsons. Let them play whatever they want, because it's about enjoying it. So I would agree, we mustn't force feed them.
And I was just saying James, after you talked us through the sonata there, that it reminded me that one of the things that I kind of say to people who say, how do I get into classical music? Where should I start? So I kind of say, although we've spent a little bit of time slagging it off, go to a concert, because actually there's something about watching it live. It is a drama, whether it's one person or an orchestra. You can actually, in an orchestra, you can actually see the music move around.
Go to the proms.
These days, go to the proms would be
Try and
great,
get
but also
as
go to a
close as
James Rhodes
possible.
concert. I think,
No, go to the proms. They absolutely get it right.
Yeah.
It's the biggest music festival in the world. It's one of the only places where you wear what you want, you clap when you want, you don't have to know anything about it. You can get tickets for $5. You can have it at lunchtime, you can have it in the evening, you can have it late night.
I promise I'm not even paying him.
No, but it's true. It's incredible. Because if you don't know about classical music, how do you know where to start? You look at the South Bank website. How do you know which conductor to see, which Bruckner symphony to see, which concerto to see? I wouldn't know where to start with that stuff.
Which is why it goes right back to the
There's
beginning.
something about the focus actually as well when you're at a live orchestral concert or instrumental concert. The mind you can remember the music, you can see the structure of the music better when you're watching it in front of you.
I'm going to take this gentleman's question, and then hopefully there's someone in the gallery. Thank you.
Hi, this is a question for James. Thank you for picking such a great selection. I've got very similar tastes in both music and pianists. But I'm very evangelical like you are about music, but I'm having this challenge communicating to non-classical music lovers. I wonder if you can help me with. I find increasingly that if I play something to a friend like Rachmaninoff B minor prelude, that things in a minor key, and you chose almost all minor key things tonight, are increasingly getting a response as depressing. And yet I find minor key music very uplifting, and I can see that you do too. But increasingly I find that kind of the young audience interpret a minor key performance as a depressing and downbeat and melancholic thing, and then they're not getting joy from the sadness that I think audience is used to. And I don't understand why. I wonder how you would communicate that through words.
That's a great question. It's interesting, isn't it? We tend to associate major key with happy and minor key with sad, and yet there are so many different flavors of sad. And I mean, God, although anyone would find that Rachmaninoff prelude like suicidally depressing, that'd be minor. I mean, God, it makes me want to throw myself out a window. And I'm not really sure how to answer that, except to say, look at bigger pieces. Instead of that prelude, play them the second piano concerto, for example, which has just the most bombastic ending, which you'd have to have a heart of stone not to get, even a semi-hard on when you're listening to it. But also, it also has a slow movement that's incredibly intense and brooding and mysterious. And also, what's this aversion we have somehow to sadness? Like, what's wrong with being sad? We have this idea, we've kind of caught that awful American thing of the pursuit of happiness. Like, it's the most important thing, and it comes from a new iPhone or a new Tinder date or whatever the fuck it is. What's wrong with just feeling a little bit sad? Like, it's normal. It's totally normal. And the truth is, one more thing before you start. And that was sad. It's so rude.
I know.
No, I would say to them that when you listen to music, it tends to turn the volume up on whatever it is you are feeling as a listener. In my experience, music does not make you feel a certain way because of the music itself, but it grows whatever it is you're feeling. So I would say maybe the people who say that, maybe they're just all really depressed.
No.
Talk to happier people.
I wasn't going to say, but I was just going to say that, I mean, isn't teenage angst and emotion, isn't that a very kind of typical teenage, I think people, some of the music I listened to when I started out listening to classical music was the sad music, was the very slow, extraordinary end of Mahler's Ninth Symphony, which is like 15 minutes of extremely sad music that then disappears, and the last minute of it is a kind of musical version of silence, really. It just disintegrates. But it's very sad. But I'm teenagers drawn to that as well as to kind of joyful, energetic, boisterous.
For teenagers to substitute humans, I think, there is something.
Yeah.
Lately. Question in the gallery. Where are you? Here you are.
Thank you. Hello. I'm Olga. I'm a pianist as well, and graduate of Royal College. Very confused until I started introducing my concerts. And then I felt that I'm really connecting with the audience much better. So the virus is spreading. If you were given all sort of support, financial, social, psychological, mental support if you need one, to write new syllables for ABRSM or Trinity, what would you do? It wouldn't consist of scales, I suppose, and it would consist of the Theodore's recordings. What else would be there?
The ABRSM, so for those who don't know, it's the standard exams that kids take and students take.
Kids and Armando.
And Armando.
Well,
I'm not a music teacher, so I wouldn't know. I don't think it's my place to answer that. If I had a choice, what I would say is I would abolish all of it, and I would judge it based entirely on the performance that the student gives. There was a piano competition that Ivo Pogorelic founded a long time ago. He's one of the great pianists. He's gone a little bit crazy, sadly. But he was at one time the greatest living pianist, there's no question. And he started a competition, and all competitions have choices of repertoire. You have to choose. They give you a list, and you have to choose what you're going to play. There's no way around it in every single round, all the way through to the final, and they give you a choice of concertos, and you do it. And he said, you play anything you want, and we judge you based on your musicianship. And I think it has to be that. It has to be that. You play the pieces you want to play, and you have a teacher or a juror who is emotional enough and sensitive enough to actually decide, I'm going to judge this based on how it makes me feel and how much the kid is enjoying it, rather than whether he uses his fourth finger instead of his third and hits a B natural instead of a B flat, because honestly, they're bigger things to worry about.
and also, could exam boards please bear in mind that there are kind of adults learning.
And get some bigger chairs.
I had to spend 5 months learning, Farmer Jodkin's tractor is broken or something, or,
So we've got a mic. Okay. Anyone else up in this side of the gallery? Make your way to the mic. We'll take this question here. Thank you very much.
Hi. Oh, can I sit down?
Yeah.
My name's Frances. I really loved your talks, all three of you. It was very, very interesting. I am not a musician at all, and so absolutely brilliant to hear you guys talk and to play. I have a question for Armando, and just interested in kind of sort of the topic is the transformative power of music, and how music has transformed your writing, or if it's transformed your writing and your work in television and film.
Oh, right, yes. Well, it sort of has, without it being very specific about it, but I always work with music on it, and I always have a sense of, I think what I've gained from music is a sense of structure. There's something very musical about comedy, and if you get geeky comedy writers together, they'll talk about how it's important. You can have arguments that can go on for an hour about where the funny word should come in the sentence. There's something, if you move it from that point to maybe the end or the beginning, the joke is ruined. There's something about the timing, the rhythm of a funny line, and open it up. There's something about the timing or structure or rhythm of a funny plot that has to have a satisfying rhythm, and it has to build up. It has to, just when you've forgotten something that was referred to earlier, suddenly it comes as you open the door. There it is. And it's just, for me, it helps to think of it in terms of music. And I did one episode of The Thick of It, which, I think it was The Thick of It, yeah, where I just thought, actually, this episode we're going to write as a fugue. We're going to do this, and then it's going to happen a bit again later. Well, they've moved on, and then the same thing's going to happen again for the third time. Well, and that's no, you're not meant to know that, but just that's how it affects me. And
which episode is it? I'm totally.
I think it was the phone-in. It was the phone-in. Okay. Radio 5 live phone-in.
Brilliant. Another question over here. Thank you.
Thank you. In 1976, I finished teacher training college, having done 3 years at music college, and went off to be a teacher, to teach music in secondary schools. Good. No, I didn't teach music. It was music studies. We didn't do any of it. We taught how to read music, and the game in terms of listening to music was if you listen to one of mine, I'll listen to one of yours. So they would bring in something and we'd listen to it, and we played something. And in 1980, I moved to an authority and started teaching music in junior schools. And I taught instrumentally, peripatetically, to children whose parents paid, and some classwork, and discovered that their total knowledge of classical music was Pachelbel's Canon, the Water Music, the Planet Suite, and Carnival of the Animals. And that was it. And then later on, I think you said 2012, I think it was earlier than that, something happened. Every child in secondary and junior school should learn an instrument at Key Stage 2. And yes, it did happen. boatloads of instruments came in from China, and we had a go. We did it subversively. It was the only way we could do it, because the head that said no thank you to your loads of money wouldn't accept that. They would accept a little bit of music going on. So yes, 3 minutes of ukulele isn't great. I was doing recorder and clarinet and things. Half an hour isn't great, but it's a damn sight better than talking about it and listening to it, but actually doing it. Don't you think that's the important thing, that children actually do it as opposed to just consume it?
I agree, but there was a huge problem. The hubs were introduced around then, and there were hubs all over the country where all of these instruments from China went to, and none of the hubs have a communication system. And no one was really in charge, and the Arts Council didn't know who had what, and schools didn't know how many instruments they had. And of course, it's a generalization to say it just didn't happen. My experience is that it was a very, very much a postcode lottery, to the point that by the time they get to secondary school, fewer than 10% of children are recorded as having learnt an instrument for a year. So some schools have amazing music, some state schools have amazing music, but they are a tiny, tiny minority in my experience. But of course, you're right, it's much better to have some access to an instrument than just listening to something.
We take one more question. Thank you very much.
So, well, this is embarrassing now. I only thought I would say this because I've driven 3 hours here and I don't know a single person in this room.
You are among friends.
Yes.
Last year I was not very well and spent some time in a psychiatric hospital where listening to music was actually really hard to do. And as a musician, a professional musician and music teacher, I play 3 instruments, music has always been my life. And for a while, the idea of even listening to music, let alone playing anything, was just impossible. I just wondered if you've ever experienced, sometimes there are really great things that you discover about listening and playing music when you're not well. Has it ever really has it had like a negative impact on you?
What a lovely question to
Amazing
end
question.
with.
Thank you for your honesty.
What a brave question. Thank you. I'm a fellow psych ward as well. I wish they did loyalty cards, you know, where you could stump them. To answer your question, yes, and that's the scariest thing of all, when what you've loved and believed in all of your life suddenly threatens to turn on you, and you think, oh, what if I can't do this anymore? Where actually, I mean, in a way, with hindsight, it's not a bad thing, because how many people have something they care so deeply about and so passionately about that it has that amount of power over you? It's a good thing for me now, looking back, that there were moments where I thought, I just can't do it. It's too painful to listen to it. And I guess it goes back to what I said earlier about listening to music turns the volume up on what you're feeling. And so, of course, if you're prone to depression, or if you're feeling depressed, or you're feeling in very low mood, or you have suicidal ideation, I mean, you listen to certain pieces of music, and inevitably, it's dangerous. In fact, in 2 of the psychiatric wards I was in, music wasn't allowed. Weirdly, you could watch Jeremy Kyle. But I think there's a reason for that, because I think it does. There's nothing scarier when you're mentally ill than a feeling. It's my experience. Whether it's a good feeling or a sad feeling, it doesn't matter. And listening to music elicits feelings. And so, to answer your question, yes, I have felt like that. But it always passes, and the love always outweighs the fear for me. I don't know if you have similar.
Yeah, well, I mean, music is I mean, I'm different in that music isn't my career, and music isn't my, my first and last thought in the day, but when you have those, when you have those weird discussions in your head, which sense would I be happy to lose and not lose? I mean, I think I'd rather be blind than deaf, I think. Because it just, the connection, the sense that I mean, again, when you were playing the Beethoven, I was thinking how it's a sort of, it feels like someone's talking to you, but I don't quite know what the words are, but I can understand the meaning.
Yeah,
and that is sort of special and indescribable.
Well, On that note, thank you so much to Armando Iannucci, James Rhodes, to everyone at Intelligence Squared, and to all of you for being a fantastic audience. Thank you.
Thank you.